exploring how we can master ourselves by looking at how authors and experts say it is possible, with your host, Shashiti Basu. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 80 of How to Be with me, Shashiti, as your timid presenter, guiding you through life's tricky topics and skills by reading through the best books out there. Before we begin, I want to introduce another podcast that I recommend. They say it's a man's world, so what does that mean for the rest of us? I wanted to take a minute to tell you about a new podcast series that is answering that question. From authors and politicians to athletes and activists, the Story of Women podcast features interviews with those who explore our world through the female gaze. And they've just launched a new season looking at change and how women make it happen. Every episode, the host Anna Stecklin speaks with women at the top of their industries who are leading social and cultural change. I'm most excited for the first episode, which features a first-time ever exclusive joint interview with Hillary Clinton and Cherie Blair, a leading international human rights lawyer and wife of the former British Prime Minister. I'd say these women know a thing or two about driving change for sure. The season also features a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Afghanistan's youngest ever female mayor, a co-creator of the Black Lives Matter movement, an indigenous environmentalist from Chad, and much, much more. For real change to happen, we need to hear more of women's voices. So be sure to subscribe to The Story of Women, wherever you get your podcasts.
There's a difference between having and exercising rights and having and exercising power. And so this is a long strain in human history that the question of women's power is a very frightening one.
We're living in turbulent times, but nothing quite like that of Iran. On September 16th, a 22-year-old woman named Mahsa Amini died in custody after being arrested by Iran's morality police in Tehran. Amini, who is Kurdish, had initially been arrested for wearing her hijab improperly, they say, but collapsed at a detention facility and slipped into a coma. Since then, mass protests have broken out across Iran and the world, pushing for a change in Iranian leadership and an end to years of gender discrimination. After Amini's death, women have bravely opted to not wear their hijabs in public as a form of solidarity, sometimes burning them or even cutting their hair. The Washington Post has called these protests the longest major demonstrations against Iran's cleric-led security state. With this in mind, what does freedom mean, especially in the context of Iran? Our first book is from Dr. Shirin Ebadi, who is a Nobel Peace Prize winner, an author, lawyer, and was the first female judge in Iran, living in exile in London since 2009. She was a judge in Iran until 1979, the year of the Islamic Revolution, after which she was not allowed to practice as one. In 1994, she co-founded the Society for Protecting the Rights of the Child. In 2002, she co-founded the Defenders of the Human Rights Center, DHRC, with other lawyers to assist those working towards promoting democracy. After her Nobel Prize, she co-founded the Nobel Women's Initiative in 2006 and used some of her prize money to support the DHRC. In 2008, the Iranian government closed down the organization by raiding her office, which had, by then, 30 lawyers working on cases. While she was traveling abroad, her professional archives and personal belongings were confiscated, her sister arrested on spurious charges as well. We are talking about her important Nobel Peace Prize winning book, Until We Are Free, My Fight for Human Rights in Iran, written in 2016. I was incredibly fortunate to speak to her and her translator, Mariam Mousavi. Hence, here is a snippet of our chat. But find the full interview on www.howtobe247.com or on the YouTube channel.
Before Ayatollah Khamenei came to Iran from exile, he was saying many beautiful things, and we were all very impressed by what we were hearing. He was saying things such as, once I'm there, everyone will be free, there will be equal rights for everyone, and we were deceived by his but it all changed when he arrived in Iran. And whatever he said, he did the opposite. For example, on 8th of March of that year, the year of the revolution, there was an announcement from the Iranian state radio saying all women who work in governmental organizations have to observe the hijab, the dress code. that's why when I realized he's a liar, and I separated my path from that of the revolution, and to date, I have been an activist. I've been opposing all the discriminatory laws that they have imposed on women. You know, when you actually believe in a cause and you believe in the path you're following, you're ready to pay any cost. And my aim was always equality. And to achieve equality, I paid the price. For instance, I was imprisoned. All my assets were confiscated. My NGO, my law firm, they were raided and they were closed down. And my sister and my husband, they were then imprisoned. So yes, I have paid a price, but I have no regrets whatsoever for my action. As I told you, when you believe in a cause and you really firmly believe in that cause, it gives you strength. Plus the fact that I believe in the existence of God, which has also given me further strength. The young generation in Iran is fortunately even more courageous than our generation was. And I see since September, when another revolution started in Iran, we've seen for the first time how even high school girls and boys have taken to the street and they are protesting alongside their parents. So they're a source of pride. And with this new generation, I expect a good future for Iran. Under the Islamic Republic of Iran, a president has virtually no power. It's the supreme leader who has absolute power. And I would like to add that Ebrahim Raisi has always been known to be more infamous and a darker character than Rouhani. This government has been in power for the past 43 years, and they have been ruling over the people, repression and crackdowns. And the current conditions are such, however, that courage of the people by far exceeds the violence meted out by the government. So, yes, that's it. Iran's relationship with the West, especially with the United States, has been very bad since the 1979 revolution. Yes, Iran and the United States, they did sign the JCPOA accord, nuclear accord, but it doesn't mean that they started any kind of relations, diplomatic relations, and nothing has changed. Iran has to have a good relationship with the West because the economic situation currently in Iran is at its worst, and that is one of the weak points of the regime. Currently, thanks to the contacts I have with my colleagues in Iran, I am doing my utmost to help. And I do so through giving speeches, my books. I have a website which is dedicated to teaching awareness of human rights. And that is what I am doing at the moment.
Dr. Ebadi's memoir highlights the struggles of human rights activists in Iran, particularly the author's own journey. Ebadi, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, has been a prominent figure in the fight for human rights in Iran, particularly for women and children. The book provides an insightful and harrowing account of the human rights violations that have been rampant in Iran since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Ebadi's own experiences from her time as a judge to her life in exile help shed light on the often overlooked struggles of those fighting for human rights in the Middle East. Ebadi begins by discussing her childhood and how she became a lawyer and judge in Iran. She describes her upbringing in a religious family, her education, and her eventual appointment as judge in 1975. She was one of the first women in Iran to hold such a position. However, her career was cut short following the Islamic Revolution, when she was dismissed from her position due to her gender and her refusal to wear a hijab in court. Following her dismissal, Ebadi continued to work as a human rights lawyer, defending women and children who were victims of abuse and discrimination. She also became an activist, speaking out against her government's human rights violations and advocating for democratic reform. However, her activism came at a cost. She was repeatedly arrested and harassed by the government, and her family was targeted as well. At one point, her husband was caught up in a honey trap and sentenced to death for adultery. In 2000, she was jailed for 3 weeks on charges of slandering government officials and banned from working as a lawyer after riling her nation's theocratic rulers. Ebadi's account of her experiences in Iran during the 1980s and 1990s highlights the brutality of the regime and the lengths to which it would go to silence dissent. She describes the arbitrary arrests and detention of activists, the use of torture and executions, and the restrictions on freedom of expression and assembly. She also discusses the impact of these violations on the lives of ordinary Iranians, particularly women and children. One of the most powerful sections of the book is Ebadi's account of the 1999 student protests in Tehran. She describes the courage and determination of the young protesters who were met with violent repression by the government. She also highlights the role of women in the protests, who were often on the front lines and played a critical role in organizing and mobilizing the movement. In 2003, Ebadi was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for her work as a human rights lawyer and activist in Iran. She said, "I would like to prove myself, at least, that I deserve this prize. I am Iranian. My place is in Iran. I have no choice but to continue working there." She also dedicated the prize to Muslim women. The latter part of the book focuses on Ebadi's life in exile and her continued activism for human rights in Iran. She discusses the challenges of being separated from her family in her home country, as well as the difficulties of advocating for change from a distance. However, she remains optimistic about the future of Iran and the potential for democratic reform. Ebadi concludes the book with a powerful message of hope and perseverance. She reminds us that the struggle for human rights is ongoing and that it is up to all of us to continue to fight for justice and equality, both in Iran and around the world. Our final book is from Akbar Ganji, a former Iranian military commander and investigative reporter who was a noted dissident. He was jailed for 6 years in Iran for advocating human rights and was represented by Dr. Ebadi at one point. Since his release in March 2006, he has been active with the human rights movement outside of Iran. The Road to Democracy in Iran is a collection of short essays that he compiled while being imprisoned in his native Iran for advocating universal human rights based on freedom from pain, fear, and intimidation. Dubbed Iran's most famous dissident, he distills his arguments into a few pivotal points that are openly, clearly idealistic, even more so in light of the policies of Iran's rulers. Here he is speaking at Google in 2008 via a translator.
A set of circumstances, including the geographic location of Iran and the complex international relations today, has led to Iran becoming the subject of a great deal of attention. In a way, one could say that the future of the Middle East is in some ways dependent on what happens to Iran. The social evolution of events in Iran will be an important factor in determining the future of the Middle East. The 1979 revolution was a popular revolution against a despotic regime supported by the US. The purpose of the goal of the revolution was freedom and independence and freedom for everyone. But the religious regime that came to power after the revolution was far more oppressive than the regime it had replaced. The alternative to a secular but dependent regime that existed in Iran could eventually turn out to be religious government. We have now had 3 decades of experience with the Islamic government. Deep in Iranian society, there are many forces that are opposed to this regime. The alternative to this regime is democratic government, one that is dedicated to respecting the principles of human rights. What is in Iran for us a reign of terror and a government of oppression might well be for many in the Middle East an ideal they hope to achieve, because the oppressive secular regimes in this region purporting to have a liberal economy often protected by the West. Naturally, the only alternative to such regimes in current circumstances is a fundamentalist regime. What is in Iran for us, a government of darkness and terror, is for many in the Middle East an ideal and source of light. That's why any change in Iran, any evolution in Iran can lead to change and evolution throughout the Middle East. This model of governance, the Islamic model of governance, has been faced defeat from several angles inside Iran. Most of the groups that are fighting this regime in Iran, whether it's the women's movement, the workers' movement, the teachers, the students, even the reformists, want a democratic government, one where religion and state are separated and stay clear of one another.
Ganji was once a commander in Iran's Revolutionary Guard during the Iran-Iraq War. He objected to the repressive government and became an investigative reporter in the 1990s. He traced a series of murders of Iranian intellectuals to the hands of Iran's secret police. He was imprisoned for 6 years as a pro-democracy dissident. In 2005, the last year of his sentence in Evin prison, Ganji undertook hunger strikes for a total of more than 70 days. While he was in solitary confinement, his weight fell to 58 kilograms. Over the course of Ganji's imprisonment, the nation's prosecutor, Saeed Mortazavi, and the head of its Justice Department, Abbasali Alizadeh, issued a string of contradictory public statements. They claimed Ganji was being taught a lesson, that he did not have medical problems, and finally, that he had a respiratory illness. Prison officials beat him. One prison guard put a drug dealer into Ganji's cell and told the dealer to kill him. When Ganji screamed and alerted the other prisoners about his new cellmate, the authorities backed off. His particular crime was criticizing Ayatollah Khamenei, then Iran's unelected leader, who clamped down on those who pushed his limits on religious democracy. Ganji protested against human rights violations perpetuated by Iran and other oppressive regimes. He asked why society only discusses human rights as defined by regions, religions, and civilizations, and he advocated universal human rights as an alternative. Ganji studied the great philosophers and advanced a concept of universal human rights that differs from Aristotle's rational philosophy. It also conflicts with the teachings of Confucius, according to the authorities in Malaysia, China, Taiwan, and Singapore, who rejected universal human rights in 1992 for that reason. Ganji proposes that pain is a common characteristic which unites all humans and can serve as the basis for establishing universal human rights, in that people should be free from threats and harm. However, if a society feels threatened, its people may curtail their own rights. For example, nations can conduct more inspections and institute heavier security during terrorist threats. The difference is that the citizenry must instigate these restrictions of personal liberties, not the government, and the loss of freedom must be temporary. People must monitor what transpires during these emergencies when rights are temporarily suspended. In the past, certain groups have capitalized on such suspensions to advance their political goals and inflict suffering, which is wrong even during the process of building a more just or egalitarian society. Here, Ganji draws on philosopher Karl Popper's negative utilitarianism. Popper advocated the least amount of suffering for the greatest number of people and said that the pursuit of a utilitarian vision does not justify inflicting harm. Ganji's ideas center on universal human rights as follows. Number 1. The basics of human rights. Ganji says the idea of universal human rights is founded on the belief that human beings, in spite of some large differences, share a common human essence. This means you can live the way you see fit, as long as you do not infringe on the rights of others. Such an approach leads to a pluralistic society. However, the reality is different and often only a few people have power. Number 2. Democracy and reform. The author believes only movements that remain dedicated to peace, freedom, and ending prejudice at every stage of their evolution can achieve victory and remain righteous. He also believes that it is possible to be Shia, Muslim, and a reformer who believes in democracy, and there would need to be a separation of state and religion. He says, instead of military action, civil disobedience is the way to achieve humanistic goals. To help Iran break out of its isolation and avoid military intervention, reformers must develop a foreign policy that includes both US negotiations and Iranian self-determination. Number 3. Bigotry in Iran. Iranian society practices an apartheid policy based on religion, race, gender, and political allegiance. He calls Iran's attitude towards women a gender apartheid. Any Iranian who brings up women's rights can be imprisoned, since advocacy can be construed as a criticism of the Prophet Muhammad. Deep prejudice against women occurs in several categories: health and the value of life. Women get less medical care, endure more illnesses, and suffer more than men from hunger and malnutrition, as they are seen as less worthy than men. Traditional religion in Iran does not respect a woman's right to control her body, hence rape and abuse are common. Women cannot leave their homes without their father or husband's authorization, which means illiteracy is high and they are forced to wear modest clothing. Iranian women also need a male relative's consent to work outside their homes, and women lack equal access to education. Number 4. Islam and the West. Ganji feels today Islam in Iran is in a defensive mode, which helps explain the rise of fundamentalism and terrorism. To complicate the situation, Islam has 3 distinct religious interpretations. Fundamental Islam interprets the Quran and Muhammad's teachings literally. It subordinates reason to faith. Modern Islam is a school of Islamic belief recognizing rational thought as the engine of the discovery of truth and knowledge. And traditional Islam, which combines fundamentalism and modernism, stresses the need to lead a spiritual, moral, and ethical life. As a result, Ganji says the precondition for peace is tolerance, and the precondition for tolerance is that the pious of all faiths must accept religious pluralism and give up the conviction that their faith is superior. So to sum up, Until We Are Free by Dr. Abadi provides an insightful and moving account of the struggles of human rights activists in Iran. Dr. Abadi's personal experiences and reflections offer a unique perspective on the challenges of fighting for change in a repressive regime. The book is a testament to the courage and resilience of those who are willing to stand up for their beliefs, even in the face of adversity. It is a must-read for anyone interested in the fight for human rights and the challenges facing those who advocate for change in the Middle East. Some key takeaways include: human rights are universal and should be protected for all people regardless of their race, religion, gender, or political affiliation. The fight for human rights is often a long and difficult one, but it is a fight that is worth fighting. It's important to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's difficult, and never give up hope. In The Road to Democracy, Ganji puts forward philosophical ideas to change the tide in the country. He suggests Iran must change and should institute slow democratic reform. Pain, a common bond that unites all people, can serve as the basis for establishing universal human rights. Human rights are the ability of people to determine their own future while being free from individual physical intimidation and fear. The guiding principle of an authentic life is individual control over one's destiny. Iranian society today operates on an apartheid policy based on religion, race, gender, and political allegiance. Iranian society systematically discriminates against women on religious grounds. Islam has 3 distinct interpretations: modernist, fundamental, and traditional. Islam remains largely traditional, stressing authority and belief in the Prophet Muhammad. It accepts traditional hierarchies and divinity's dominance in everyday life. I can't tell you what an honor it was to speak to Dr. Abadi, and even more so as we understand how fundamental her work was to help the next generation fight the current oppression. We cannot turn a blind eye to those who are dying for freedom. Please join in on the conversation by following @HowToBe247 on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and subscribe on the podcast, which can be found via www.howtobe247.com. Please do leave a review if you found this helpful and you want to be featured. Remember to check out Patreon for exclusive unseen bonus material from every single interview, all for a price of coffee. And don't forget to check out the new website. See you next week.